So, you have 3 cavalry units in the game. One of them is the hussar, the second one is the lancer, and the third one is the, let me check real quick, cuirassier. I can never remember this name for some reason. The first one is kinda like a light cavalry, the hussar it is. Lancer is kinda in between the cuirassier and the hussar, and the cuirassier is a heavy cavalry unit. Movement wise, the first 2 cavalry units are about the same speed, while the cuirassier is a little bit slower than them. Now the interesting thing happens damage wise. I'm going to select each and every one of them and assign them to a single line infantry, and in the meanwhile I will also set some targets for these hussars down here, and I will showcase how bad exactly these types of terrains are for the cavalry units. And let's hit play. Now let's look at these fights on the right. Nothing interesting so far. I will keep these moving around just so we can get the full replay, because if I don't move these then the replay will just skip instantly. Okay, nothing interesting yet. Although now you can see that the line infantry takes a lot more damage for the lancer and for the cuirassier than for the hussar. But let's see how it's going to develop. Now I start seeing the hussar taking massive damages in all 3 of these scenarios, in the village, in the forest and on the plains as well. And another turn later, the hussars are almost giving up on the fight, and so are the lancers are getting tired actually. Now we are just about to lose the hussar in the village and also in the forest. The guy in the plains just gave up as well. Now we only have the lancer and the cuirassier. But it seems like, unless I'm wrong, that the cuirassier would burn. Yeah, so our heavy cavalry is the only one that managed to beat a line infantry in this situation. Now the problem here was that we kinda charged straight at the enemy, and cavalry units are not meant to directly handle infantry fire. Now also look at the damage that we dealt to the infantry. The cuirassier managed to destroy barely an infantry unit, at least organization wise, while the lancer and the regular cavalry, the hussars, managed to significantly weaken the line infantry, although in the forest and in the town they barely dealt any damage. That is why you should never use cavalry in the forest or in the towns to try to attack up on an infantry unit, because simply the forest is just terrible for melee damage as well as for movement. And you know, the 2 things about cavalry is that they deal melee damage and they are supposed to be fast, but in the forest they are neither strong and neither fast. And the same goes for the town, although in the town these debuffs get even more significant, with minus 80% melee attack and minus 40 movement. So one way to use a cavalry is to just try to flank a unit from behind, or if you cannot do that or just want to try something wilder, then there's actually a tactic called a blobbing. In this situation we have a line infantry, but I will let him turn around, so I skip the turn real quick. And right now we are just going to flood him with 3 heavy cavalries. I selected the seek order and I will click on the infantry. And now watch him get beaten to pieces. 1 turn has passed, let's see the second turn. And it's already dead by the second turn. Now if you remember, for this one cuirassier was barely able to damage 1 line infantry. But when we brought 3 of them against that single line infantry, we barely suffered any casualties. As you see, our only damage unit is this one that lost 50 men and some orc. Cavalry is also amazing to ambush artilleries. We will look into that in a minute. As well as to break up formations either by the blobbing that I just showed, or by flanking units from behind, or something that I really like is to just create some threat passively. But first of all, let's look into a game played by perhaps the most famous cavalry players, President, and he's up against someone who has, well, a decent-ish build. He has some cavalry, but some regular cannons, some guards infantry at least, also a bunch of fine infantry, but we will see how this game plays out and how will President utilize on his cavalry advantage. The blue player seems to form a single blob of cavalry on the right, and if you look at this, blue actually managed to kinda match red's numbers on the right. Perhaps he seeks to disable red's cavalry from being able to charge at him from the right, just simply by creating a deterrent. However, the heavy cavalry is called heavy cavalry for a reason, so red has a great quality advantage on the right flank. And worse than that, he's completely unopposed on the left flank. And so President is going to create a threat there, and blue's only counter seems to be this fortress of units defending the artillery in the forest. Let's see as the game plays out. We have a cavalry engagement on the right, and red seems to be coming out on top just from the first contact. So just a second ago you have seen how blue kinda tried to box in that one heavy cavalry unit. However, that also meant that he got boxed in other parts of the engagement. And now as you see, blue already has 2 very low HP units, and so he basically lost this engagement. At the meanwhile, he's taking some nice bites of red's infantry, but that may not be enough. Now let's see if blue can react to red's cavalry threat. And we see a classic blobbing on the right, on the left flank. However, it is forest. Red is supposed to have a disadvantage there, but let's see if that is enough. I'm not gonna lie, I think that President messed up with that blobbing, just because the forest is still a forest. However, blue has massively failed in garrisoning his cannons. For some reason he just didn't close off the gap. I don't know why. And so even though that he had a very good position, now I think that he's going to lose. Especially because I just looked at his cavalry flank on the right. There we go, his cannons are now almost completely gone. Even though that red's cavalry left flank got a pretty big hit. As you see, one of his units is even down. But that doesn't seem to be enough. And now the right flank just joined the battle. The blue tries to counterattack with his cavalry, but he's basically charging against a heavy cavalry unit once again, so he cannot really do anything. And in fact, there is barely any blue units still fighting now. So yeah, this was an interesting game. It could have been improved by a lot, but because of this reason, now we are going to check at the game that our player President, the cavalry guy, played against the #1 player ECU. Now let's see how this plays out. ECU seems to be going for the hills, while President seemed to have hoped to have an engagement on the left. Now I might say that if President had his cavalry on the right at the beginning, ECU may not have had the confidence to march his Hobbitsen up the hill. And look at that, he just calmly recovers his Lancer unit from the left flank. And he sets his Hobbitsen up for some slaughter. He has a very nice garrisoning at the moment. And once it becomes more obvious, I will say some more stuff about it. ECU has both line infantry and also garrisons. Just look at how he places the guards. Look at how he places the guards units. He puts the guards into the position that matters the most to defend his artillery, because his artillery is his wonder weapon. Red has no artillery to worry about. Before the game, when Blue picked his army composition, he decided to include the artillery, and because of that, he wasn't able to get cavalry or more infantry, because they wanted to include the artillery in the battle. Now, if you were to lose the artillery, that is basically just wasting a bunch of resources at the beginning of the game. That is basically just wasting all your resources for an incomplete build. And that is why it is very thoughtful and smart to place your best infantry units with the most orc and HP on the defense of your most important units, the Hobbitsen. And as Red will try to charge at them, these very bulky guard units are able to hold the advance for long enough. Even if one of them falls, it managed to hold them for long enough for the Hobbitsen to take further damage. Now remember, artillery and Hobbitsen, they are very powerful at short ranges. So when the enemy cavalry is this close to it, but there are some infantry units of yours stopping them from actually getting to the Hobbitsen, you are going to deal massive damages to them. And even here, Red tries to get to Blue's Hobbitsen, but I may want to tell you about a feature, or yeah, it's kind of like a feature, called pinning. Now, Red's cavalry is able to actually touch Blue's artillery. However, they are pinned because they are also fighting Blue's line infantry over here, and because they are pinned down by an infantry unit, they cannot actually attack the artillery. They have to kill the infantry first. I think that's how the developers wanted to make artillery a little harder to destroy. So right now, if your cavalry touches an infantry and an artillery at the same time, it will only damage the infantry until the infantry lost all of its organization. But as you see, ECU does start to lose his cannons a little bit. One of his Hobbitsen is down, and this one was saved by a hair. This Hobbitsen just got saved by pinning, so keep pinning in mind. That is a very important mechanic in this game. However, on the north, Blue has lost one more Hobbitsen, and they managed to save this one by a hair as well. However, just look at how much damage ECU managed to deal on Red before losing half his artillery. Red's most important cavalry unit is now down, as well as 3 of his hussars, 1 of his lancers, and the other just rejoined the fight, and 3 of his line infantry as well, and I didn't count this hussar, but yeah, Red is now in a weakened position, and ECU will now take advantage of that. Look, he just committed to a close hand fight against this weakened infantry. He is also micro damage maxing on the far right flank. Now his cavalry did almost get to his cannons, but he couldn't, and President had to resign at this point. Now, to be fair, the battle was still kinda even-ish, just because how low ECU's artilleries were. But you cannot turn this battle around when there's literally 600 or 500 ALO difference between you, and you already lost like 10% more of your power. And so now I will show one more game that President played against a player with a similar ranking to him. But unlike ECU, this player had some cavalry units, because ECU only had one lancer as his whole cavalry corps. But this guy seems to have a bit more cavalry, and he also uses the regular cannons, which only a few people do these days. So I'm going to show how this build is able to compete against this crazy cavalry build. As the battle begins, blue just sets up on the hill, because if red was to charge at him, he would lose some time every time he tried to like climb up on these slopes. And red seems to be reluctant over here. Eventually blue commits, and then red will try to split his cavalry into like two flanks. But for now, blue just does some pretty nice garrisoning. And now we see red's cavalry just going around the enemy's formation, trying to create some threats on the back ranks. However, one thing that I dislike about this execution is how President's cavalry was touching the enemy's infantry's firing range, so the enemy could have and probably dealt some damage to his cavalry in the meanwhile. Yeah, look at that, they're getting shot at. And now the main infantry front arrives. President likes to use his infantry as a way to pin down the enemy's center, basically. Because if the enemy center is busy fighting with President's infantry, they cannot really garrison as efficiently as they would otherwise. And so now you have a cavalry battle on the right. It looks very messy. For now, President might have a slight advantage, but we will see how that goes on. Blue activates his garrisons, closing up the gaps in front of the artillery. I would have left a little bit of a window in front of the artillery just so that they can deal some damage on the enemy as the battle progresses. And now they are also exposed to this chunk of infantry ready to charge at the artillery. And surely enough, they try to take their chance and get to the artillery. Although blue managed to relocate one of his guard infantries, actually his only guard infantry, to hold up the enemy charge. And here's this very crazy thing about this match, how blue just seems to be completely moving his cannons behind enemy lines. The enemy's infantry is right here. Blue moves his cannons so close to the enemy, and yet the enemy cannot do anything about it, because blue has the upper hand in the center now. And look, red even turns around some of his infantry, desperate to kill that artillery unit over there. But that just further cements their downfall, because when your unit is facing the other way and they're getting shot from the back, they will take much more damage than if they got shot from the front. Also, on the right flank, you can see red's cavalry fleeing. Now, I cannot make sense of this cavalry battle on the right flank, because it's just so messy, all the units overlap kinda, but red seems to be losing somehow. Although blue is about to lose an artillery, and the left flank is a mess, but blue seems to be kinda encircling red on the larger picture, even though that blue has two units encircled in the middle. We will see how the battle goes on. Red tries to charge at the artillery, and they do get there, but then they get pinned by that line infantry, and now the artillery might be saved. Never mind, it's still lost, but it was a very nice plan and an almost good execution. Blue did manage to lose his artillery, and cavalry heavy builds always try to take out the artillery. As I said, they want to devalue your build. If you lose your cannons, you are basically a weaker army. And so they did manage to do that. However, in the meanwhile, they lost so many units. You can probably see more red units fleeing right now than fighting on the battleground. And as you see, red was just so locked in on destroying the cannons that they weren't able to gain the upper hand in the battle. They lost too many men and now blue is just winning. Look. And red has resigned. Maybe like one more quick thing about cavalry. The first moment you hit an enemy, the enemy gets dealt a charge bonus against them. So if you have your cavalry charging at an infantry and you hit them for the first time, the infantry should take more damage than for the rest of the turns, because they get a charge debuff. However, for that to trigger, your cavalry has to be going actively towards the infantry for at least half of that turn's duration. And also one more thing, now that cavalry and artillery has been both covered, now comes the box stuff. The main part of this all.